So Jesus is now, then before, it's just after 6, I put it here, Jesus comes to the palace, and as soon as it was day, the assembly of the elders and the people that were gathered together. So as soon as it was day, it's probably there for around 6, maybe a bit after, that actually people start going out to gather the council together, the assembly of the elders. So it's not going to be instantaneous. There's no phones or whatever. Obviously, they have to send messages out. So both the chief priests and the scribes, they led him away and into their council. So Jesus is sent from Annas. It's after daybreak when he's sent. He comes to Caiaphas. He's held for a bit. Messages are sent out, and the elders gather together. I've just wanted to kind of give a sense of the flow of time. So I put there's assuming a bit of time, not necessarily masses, but actually the Sanhedrin get brought together. Now Sanhedrin, which probably has over 70. 70 was sort of seen as a symbolic number for it. It goes back to the 70 elders that were there with Moses when the Ten Commandments were given. But we know throughout kind of history, there's a regular combination of 70 or 72 is used symbolically of a large kind of council-style gathering. Even in Jesus's sending out of his disciples, remember he sends 70, but some manuscripts say 72, because it's a symbolic number as much as anything, rather than an absolutely literal one. And we know that the numbers vary from time to time as younger people come in, and some people have sort of become a bit too old to do it, but they're still around. And we do have a rough idea of some of the kind of the makeup of the council. But however it works, there's enough of them there to be quorate. Caiaphas is now presiding. Not everybody who is in the council absolutely despises Jesus. Some are intrigued by him. So it's now daytime, so this is a legal trial. They've been properly convened, it's during the day, there are witnesses, there's a semblance of formality, and there are rules from the Mishnah that they have to be followed, which we read about. And which is why we've often said it was an illegal trial, because in our minds we've assumed it's all happened at night. But you notice that it only happens after daybreak, when Jesus is sent away from Annas to Caiaphas. So the rules state that trials must be held during the daytime. It is. A verdict has to be reached during daytime, but in a capital case, you can acquit on the same day, but a conviction can only be confirmed on the following day. And you'll notice as we read through this is exactly what happens. They reconvene the next day to get the conviction. So therefore, trials can't be held on the eve of a Sabbath. Okay, so it's but it's not. If you remember, I should have actually put did I put the calendar up in the last one? Hang on, where's the calendar gone? There it is. If you notice, the eve of the Sabbath would be during the Friday. But remember, this is still Thursday morning. You see, that was another reason why it's often thought it was illegal. It's actually Thursday morning, but it has to be done quickly because it has to be finished before Friday starts, before the evening comes. So let's go back to the rules. And let me just put myself back on. So there you go. So I'm not being totally invisible to you. So they can't be held on the eve of the Sabbath or of a feast day, and it can't be held on the feast day itself. Because actually one of the things is because the writing of minutes would be forbidden. So this is probably going to all be done officially. And so there are questions asked and there are witnesses brought. So, hang on. Okay, that one starts halfway through. So it should say something like, they were saying, if you are the Christ, tell us. But he said, if I tell you, you won't believe it. And if I ask you, you will in no way answer me or let me go. So now the chief priests and the elders and the whole council sought false testimony. So it starts relatively straightforward with them asking him lots of questions, but you get the idea, although it's probably summarized, that Jesus is responding. He's holding his counsel a bit more now. They seek false testimony and witnesses against Jesus. They might put him to death, and they found none. Although as we read on, they did find people who were willing to bring a false testimony. And actually we get a rough idea of where they found them as we put the story together. Even though many false witnesses came forward and many gave false testimony against him. So what it's driving at is they couldn't find anything genuine, but they were willing to finding people who were willing to say things that weren't really true. But most of those didn't really agree with each other. We don't know much about what they said, but later 2 false witnesses came forward and stood up. and gave false testimony against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another one not made with hands. Well, we know from John's Gospel who these people are. Because remember, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he had turned over the money tables. He was just a Galilean hothead at that point. He wasn't well known. He didn't have a following. And at that point, it's the temple guards who probably chucked him out, because that's what one of their jobs was, people who were making trouble with the in the markets. And the temple guards themselves were extended family of the senior high priest. They were all from the priestly caste, from the tribe of Levi. They worked in rotation. So these are almost certainly, and seeing as these words are quoted verbatim from that first incident, which Matthew, Mark and Luke don't tell us about, but we read in John's Gospel, where Jesus says, I'm able to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. That's where they found him from 3 years before. The temple guards who are on the payroll of the priests who are trying the case come in. They tell a story which is sort of true, even though they're kind of being a little bit obtuse and seeing it rather literally. And so at that point, the high priest stands up in the midst and says to Jesus, haven't you got an answer for this? What are these things they testify against you? But Jesus held his peace, stayed quiet, just said nothing, answered nothing. So they all said, then they could start turning it around, asking him the question, are you the Son of God? Which is presumably something that has come up, has been quoted of him saying. And again, the high priest asked, I adjure you by the living God, so kind of really pushing him to try and say something now. Tell us, are you the Christ, the Son of God, the blessed? Now Jesus does respond. Jesus said, you said it, and you say it because I am. So, nevertheless, I tell you this, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power of God and coming of the clouds of the sky. And Jesus expands his answer. He has regularly used the phrase Son of Man, which is a title that is even used of an ambiguous character in the book of Daniel that seems divine. It's a divine character. So is it God? Is it not God? And in that context, he says, you will see it. And he's sitting at the right hand of power. You see, once a year, the high priest, who's just asked the question, is allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, but he doesn't sit down. He goes in stood, surrounded by the clouds. And what he's saying is, one day you're going to go in there and you'll see me sitting there on the mercy seat, sitting at the right hand of the power of God and coming on the clouds of the sky, not just in the clouds of incense. And it's almost as if Jesus has waited and waited and waited. Now he's going to give them what they need. They haven't found it because actually he hasn't really done anything deserving of death. But he is going to say something that is going to be so outrageous to them that he's now going to effectively earn that verdict. So the high priest tore his clothes, saying, what further need do we have of witnesses? He's spoken blasphemy. Behold, now you've heard his blasphemy. Now there's a problem, because not everybody in there was 100% wanting to see Jesus executed. But Jesus has now said something that is one of those things that's very difficult to disagree with. You may kind of feel in principle that this is the wrong thing, but he's sort of technically done the things you shouldn't. And we've all subscribed to the idea that blasphemy is the worst sin, so therefore we must all agree to that. So what do you think? And they said, why, we don't need any more witnesses. We ourselves have heard it from his own mouth. So they all condemned him and answered, he is worthy of death. So then some began to spit on his face and to cover his face and to beat him with fists. We got again that same thing. Whether that's still the temple guards maybe reprising what they have done already when Jesus is with Annas. Saying, who prophesied to us, Christ, who hit you? And then it says the officers received him with blows. Now that's a fascinating little phrase, because it basically means Jesus is handed over into custody. The officers received him. So if you're received by the officers, you're handed over to be locked up and kept in custody. So at this point, Jesus is being put into custody. Again, it's something we often miss in the telling of the story. And there's a reason for that, because, of course, according to the Mishnah, if this is going to be a capital sentence, we have correctly brought the sentence on the same day, but we have to commit the sentence until the next day, because there's a cooling down period overnight to make sure that the next day people are still in agreement with it. So he's put into custody of the officers. So he's held in custody, and now arrangements are being made, because obviously the council is going to have to reconvene tomorrow to confirm his verdict, but they can't actually commute the sentence. And if they're going to commute the sentence, they actually have to make arrangements to see Pilate. And we actually get a hint of that. You'll notice here, I've put, calling a capital trial requires written permission in advance. This would have had to been sent to Pilate after the appearance before the Sanhedrin, when then the preparations would have had to be made to present the case. Now you'll notice in there, if you read the references, that's all taken from a commentary on Acts 24 to 26, where similarly a case is made against Paul by the Sanhedrin, who want to have him executed, and so it is actually in a commentary on Acts 24 to 26 and Paul's trial. And I got this piece of information that actually, if you're wanting to do things properly, you have to make the case, and you have to book thing at least one day in advance. So presumably in the afternoon, someone goes off to talk to Pilate to make an arrangement to come before him to present their case, because this is still Thursday afternoon. So. And you'll notice Mark 15 and Matthew 27 say that Jesus is taken to Pilate very early in the morning, whereas actually this has been a reasonably busy day. Do you remember they've first of all had to be gathered after sunset, then they make accusations. That doesn't get very far. Then they go looking for witnesses. They find witnesses, but they're contradicting each other. So then they find within their own ranks there's someone who remembers him making the statement about pulling down the temple. They kind of misconstrue it a bit and throw that at him. Jesus doesn't respond. So we however you cut it, we've gone through several hours. It's not early in the morning on the same day. And for both Roman purposes and for Jewish purposes, we actually need to wait for the Friday. So Jesus is kept in custody probably from some point in the afternoon of Thursday through till 6 the next morning. For the rest of Thursday, brought by the chief guards and the priests to Pilate early the next day. So then we read, now immediately when morning had come, all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes and the whole council held a consultation against Jesus to put him to death. Well, that's just a statement of what I've told you we know from the Mishnah is what they have to do. So it's a slightly different to when they gathered yesterday. So they've come back together and say, are we all still agreed? And presumably they all are, because we know what happens. And the whole company of them then rose up. They bound him and led him or carried him away and delivered him up before Pontius Pilate, the governor. So they led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium, and it was early, but they themselves didn't enter the praetorium because they might not be defiled, and they might eat the Passover. So before we go on, we just get a little bit familiar again with some more people and places.